I am Joshua, 32 years old, and my family cut me off for 4 straight years, only to walk into my restaurant uninvited on a busy Tuesday night and demand 15% of my business. Before I tell you about the absolute legal nightmare I dropped on their heads, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The evening rush at my restaurant in downtown Austin was operating like a perfectly tuned engine. It was 7:15 p.m., the exact moment when the dining room hits that sweet spot of chaotic harmony. The low, warm amber lighting bounced softly off the reclaimed wood walls, wood that I had personally sanded and stained 3 years ago when I couldn't afford a contractor. The air in the room was heavy with the intoxicating scent of charred oak from the wood-fired grill, the sharp herbal bite of fresh rosemary, and the rich, dark notes of the expensive Cabernet we poured by the glass. I built this place from the absolute ground up. Every single nail in the floorboards, every locally sourced item on the menu, every piece of brushed brass trim above the front door with my name etched into it. It was mine. It was the only real home I had ever known. I was standing at the pass in the kitchen, wiping the rim of a plate holding perfectly seared scallops, when my floor manager, Priya, pushed through the heavy stainless steel double doors. She didn't walk. She practically glided, but her posture was entirely wrong. She clutched her wooden reservation clipboard tight to her chest, her knuckles turning white. Her dark eyes were wide, and she was looking at me the way people look at someone who just blindly stepped off a curb into oncoming traffic. "Joshua," she said, her voice tight and barely above a whisper, clearly trying not to alert the line cooks working behind me. "There is a family at table 7. A man, a woman, and a younger guy. They didn't have a reservation. They pushed past the host stand and said you would understand." I understood immediately. The temperature in my chest dropped to absolute zero. All the ambient noise of the kitchen, the sizzling pans, the shouting of orders, the clattering of silverware, faded into a dull, underwater hum. I hadn't spoken to a single member of my family in 4 years. I wouldn't have called them to plan my own funeral. They had erased me from their lives the moment I stopped being useful to them. I took a slow, deep breath, forcing my heart rate to stay steady. I untied my stained apron, folded it methodically over the metal prep counter, and smoothed down my chef's coat. "Keep the line moving," I told Chloe, my sous chef. Then, I pushed through the swinging doors and walked out into the dining room. Table 7 was my best table. It sat right by the massive front window, offering a perfect, unobstructed view of the glittering Austin skyline. And there they were, sitting right in the middle of my sanctuary like a dark cloud. My father, David, sat in the center. He had a glass of my house Cabernet in front of him, a $22 glass of wine that he definitively had not paid for. He was wearing his tailored navy suit, the one he wore when he wanted to intimidate bank managers. Beside him sat my mother, Sarah. Her reading glasses were perched precariously on the end of her nose as she scrolled mindlessly through her phone, her posture radiating that she was already profoundly bored with the conversation before it had even started. And across from them sat my older brother, Matthew, the golden child. He leaned aggressively back in his chair with his arms crossed over his chest, projecting the unearned, arrogant confidence of a man who owned the entire building. He didn't own a square inch of it. I did. Resting right next to his water glass, placed deliberately so the logo would catch the light, was a heavy leather keychain with the golden crest of a Porsche. My father looked up from his menu when he saw me approaching. He smiled. It was that easy, terrifying smile of a man who believes the entire world is obligated to bend to his will. It was a smile that pretended the last 4 years of deafening silence had never happened. "There he is," my father announced loudly, drawing the attention of a nearby couple arguing over the custody of their dog. "Look how well you clean up, Joshua." I stopped right at the edge of the table. I didn't pull out the empty 4th chair. I didn't sit down. I needed the height advantage. I needed the small, psychological high ground of being the only person standing. "You need to leave," I said. My voice was completely flat, devoid of any warmth or welcome. "I have a full house in 20 minutes, and this table is reserved. We are not going anywhere." My mother didn't even bother to look up from her phone screen. "We drove a long way, Joshua," my father added, swirling the wine in his glass. "The absolute least you can do is show some respect and hear us out." "You drove 2 hours from San Antonio," I replied coldly. "It is a straight shot down the highway. It's not a pilgrimage. Get out of my restaurant." "Don't be smart," my mother snapped. She finally set her phone face down on the white tablecloth and folded her manicured hands. She looked older, the lines around her mouth deeper, but the manipulative edge in her eyes was as sharp as ever. "Your brother needs your help. That is all this is. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't an emergency." Matthew looked at me then. For a fraction of a second, the arrogant facade slipped, and I saw a shadow of real panic cross his face. Not shame. He wasn't capable of shame. It was raw, desperate fear. Then he masked it, leaning further back into his chair. "Nice place," he muttered, looking around the room. I stared at the paper. I didn't touch it. It felt toxic just being near it. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You brought a lawyer-drafted document to give my brother a stake in my life's work. You drove 2 hours unannounced, ambushed me at my place of business, and expect me to sign away 15% of my company between the appetizer and the main course. We knew you wouldn't take our calls," my father said simply, taking a slow sip of my wine. "There is a very good reason for that, David." My mother shifted into her patient, sad mother voice, the exact register she used to use to guilt-trip me into doing Matthew's chores when we were teenagers. "Joshua, your brother made some mistakes with his latest venture. He is trying to get back on his feet. Just look around you." She gestured widely toward the vaulted ceiling, the gleaming mahogany bar, the waitstaff moving gracefully. "You have all of this. He has nothing right now. He is facing total ruin. Does that feel right to you? Sitting on your high horse while your own blood drowns? Does that feel like family?" I looked at her. The audacity was breathtaking. I thought about my freezing studio apartment 4 years ago. I thought about eating cheap instant noodles on Christmas Eve entirely alone because I couldn't afford a $20 bus ticket or a decent meal. I thought about the crushing weight of the secret debt they had buried me under, the inheritance of misery they had forced upon me. "I need to get back to my kitchen," I said, keeping my posture rigid. "I will have Priya bring you the check for the wine, and then I want you out. We are not leaving." My father's voice dropped an octave. The fake smile vanished completely, replaced by cold, hard steel. "You owe this family, Joshua. I do not want to make this ugly tonight, but I absolutely will." He leaned forward, planting his heavy elbows on the table, invading my space. "You want me to start talking to your private investors? Your landlord? I know exactly who owns this building. Marcus Chun holds your commercial lease here. Marcus and I went to the same church for 15 years. We played golf. One phone call from me, Joshua. One single phone call, and I can make your life very, very complicated." There it was, the knife slipping right between the ribs. The real reason they drove down here on a Tuesday night. It was a shakedown. Pure extortion wrapped in the poisonous guise of family ties. I looked at him for a long, agonizing moment. I kept my face perfectly still. I didn't let him see my heart hammering against my ribs, the sudden spike of adrenaline flooding my veins. "Give me until the end of dinner service," I said, my voice eerily calm. 10 o'clock. I will come back to this table and we will talk." My father leaned back, deeply satisfied. He tapped the folded paper on the table. "That is all we are asking. Take your time. We'll order some appetizers." I turned and walked back toward the kitchen. I did not panic. I want to be very clear about that, because what happened next required me to be colder and more calculating than I had ever been in my entire life. I walked past the bustling line cooks, ignoring the frantic shouting of ticket orders, and locked the heavy door to my small back office. The room was barely larger than a closet. It smelled intensely of roasted coffee beans, damp printer paper, and exhaustion. I slumped heavily into my cheap desk chair, and stared blindly at the glowing screen of my laptop. But I wasn't seeing the weekly inventory spreadsheets or the payroll data. I was staring straight into the past. When I was 19 years old, I was working 2 grueling minimum wage jobs, flipping burgers during the day and stocking grocery shelves at night, just desperately trying to put myself through culinary school. My parents had made it abundantly clear early on that there was absolutely no college fund for me. Every spare dime this family generated had been funneled into Matthew's series of failed startup ventures and his expensive lifestyle. I was on my own. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I tried to get a basic, cheap apartment lease near campus. I filled out the paperwork, handed over my application fee, and waited. 10 minutes later, the leasing agent came out. She looked at me with a mixture of profound pity and disgust, and handed me a printed copy of my credit report. There was a massive, bleeding red mark right in the center of my financial history. A $32,000 personal business loan. It was completely defaulted, buried in late fees, and had been sent to aggressive collections months ago. It had been taken out using my name, my birth date, and my social security number. I remember stumbling out of that office and sitting on the wet concrete curb outside. My hands were shaking so violently that I dropped my cheap cell phone twice before I finally managed to dial my father's number. When he answered, he didn't even sound surprised. He didn't sound guilty. He sounded annoyed that I was interrupting his day. He flat out admitted it. He told me that Matthew's logistics business had hit a rough patch, that they desperately needed the cash to keep him afloat, and since my credit was a blank slate, anyway, it was the logical choice to use my identity. We were going to pay it back. My father had said over the phone, his tone dripping with thick condescension. But things happen, Joshua. The market turned. You live under our roof, you eat our food, we paid for your braces. This is just what family does. You take the hit for your brother. You'll build your credit back up eventually. It took me 2 agonizing, soul-crushing years of manual labor to pay off a debt I never signed for. I worked back-to-back double shifts. I sold my only car and walked 3 miles to work in the freezing rain. I destroyed the best years of my 20s just to fix the fraudulent wreckage my father had created to save his golden boy. When the balance finally hit 0, I didn't celebrate. I changed my phone number, packed 2 suitcases, and moved to Austin in the dead of night. I never looked back. I accepted then and there that I had no inheritance, no safety net, and no family. My phone buzzed violently on the desk, snapping me violently back to the present reality. I picked it up. It was a text message from a number I hadn't yet blocked. It was my Uncle Carter. Hey Josh, just a heads up. Your dad knows about the restaurant. He found out how well you're doing and the kind of salary you're pulling now. They're heading your way tonight. Please just be generous. Remember, blood is thicker than water. Don't make a scene. I gripped the phone so tightly the glass screen protector creaked. How the hell did my father find out? I kept my personal life completely off social media. I specifically used a blind LLC to shield my ownership of the restaurant from public records. Someone had to have told them. Someone who knew my exact income, my success, and my physical location. I scrolled furiously through my contacts and hit call on Wyatt's name. Wyatt was an old buddy from my culinary school days. 2 months ago, he came rolling through Austin, down on his luck, going through a brutal, messy divorce. I felt bad for him. I gave him free meals for a week, let him crash on my apartment couch, and even showed him my private financial projections to encourage him to start his own place. Wyatt answered on the second ring, music blaring in the background. Hey man, busy night at the Golden Goose? Wyatt? I said, my voice dangerously low, stripped of any friendly warmth. Did you talk to my father? The music in the background suddenly muted. Heavy, guilty silence filled the line. Josh, man, listen. Wyatt stammered, his voice jumping an octave. He called me. He sounded really worried about you, man. And I mentioned how great the restaurant was doing, how your salary is through the roof now. I didn't think it was a big deal. He's your dad. You sold me out? I whispered, the betrayal burning like battery acid in my throat. You knew exactly what they did to me, I told you about the $32,000. And you gave them my exact address and financials. Come on, they're your parents. He said Matthew was in deep trouble. I thought you'd want to step up and help. Don't be so greedy, Josh. I hung up the phone. A familiar, dark sickness twisted in my gut. It was pure jealousy. Wyatt saw what I had built from nothing, and some dark, petty part of him wanted to see it tested. He wanted to see me dragged back down to his level. That was the world I lived in. If I showed even an ounce of weakness tonight, my family would bleed me dry until I was right back on that wet curb with nothing. I opened a new text message. I typed 3 words to the only person in the city I truly trusted with my life. They are here. Table 7. Need you. 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Then her reply, on my way. Do not sign a single piece of paper. 25 minutes later, there was a sharp, authoritative knock on the heavy steel door at the back of the kitchen alleyway. I pushed past a busboy carrying a stack of dirty plates and threw the deadbolt. Diana stepped out of the humid Texas night and into the chaotic heat of my kitchen. Diana was 60 years old, with sharp, meticulously styled silver hair and the impeccable, terrifying posture of a woman who had spent 30 years shredding opposing counsel in high-stakes corporate courtrooms. She was a senior partner at one of the most ruthless law firms in the state. More importantly, she was my lawyer, my mentor, and the closest thing I had to a real mother. When I was just a 22-year-old line cook with a dream and zero capital, she looked at my first business plan, circled 6 clauses that would have bankrupted me in a month, and spent 3 hours teaching me how to rebuild it so I wouldn't get eaten alive by predatory investors. She stepped onto the tile, her expensive designer heels clicking sharply. She didn't waste a single second on pleasantries. Where are they? She asked, her eyes scanning the kitchen. Table 7. Front window. Drinking my best wine, I replied. We moved quickly into my office. I locked the door behind us, sealing us off from the noise. I didn't sit down. I paced the length of the small room like a caged animal while I briefed her. I told her everything. I told her about the $200,000 debt Matthew was allegedly drowning in. I told her about the demand for an immediate 15% equity stake in my life's work. And finally, I told her about my father's specific threat regarding Marcus Chun and my commercial lease. Diana listened, her face an unreadable, stony mask. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she calmly opened her sleek silver laptop, set it on my desk, and connected to my secure Wi-Fi. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with lethal precision. First of all, Diana said, her eyes locked onto the glowing screen, her voice dripping with disdain. Your father is an arrogant idiot. Marcus Chun doesn't care about local church politics or your father's golf handicap. Marcus cares about yield. You pay your commercial rent early every single month, and the foot traffic your restaurant generates has increased the property value of this entire city block by 20%. Furthermore, Marcus and I play golf every other Sunday. I will handle him personally. That threat is completely empty. It's a bluff to scare a child. I let out a long, ragged breath, feeling some of the tension drain from my shoulders. Okay, good. But what about Matthew? My father brought a drafted contract. They want equity tonight, Diana. They aren't leaving without blood. Let's see exactly why your brother is suddenly so incredibly desperate, she murmured. She logged into a series of proprietary public records databases and deep background asset search tools that only high-end attorneys and private investigators paid for. I stood right behind her chair, watching the data cascade across the screen. He drove here in a Porsche, I noted bitterly. He has the keys sitting right on the table next to his water glass. He loves showing off his wealth. Diana let out a sharp, entirely humorless laugh. A Porsche? Joshua, look at this screen. She pointed a manicured finger at a line of highlighted text. Matthew doesn't own a Porsche. It is a short-term commercial lease under a shell company that filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy 3 weeks ago. He's driving a rental car he absolutely cannot afford, probably to keep up appearances for his creditors. She kept digging, her eyes narrowing as she pulled up court filings. He was bragging on LinkedIn last month about a massive promotion at a logistics firm in Dallas. It's totally fake. He's an independent contractor, and he is currently being sued by 3 different private lenders. This $200,000 isn't a standard bank loan, Joshua. It's private, unsecured debt. These are hard money lenders. The kind of people who don't send polite collection letters when you miss a payment. They send men to your front door to break things. I stared at the screen, a sick sense of vindication washing over me. My brother, the golden child, the one who was always deemed smarter, better, and more deserving in my parents' eyes, was a complete and utter fraud. He was sitting out there in my beautiful dining room, pretending to be a hotshot investor gracing me with his presence, while his entire life was a house of cards actively catching fire. He needs the 15% stake in your restaurant to show those violent lenders he has tangible collateral, Diana explained, closing the browser tabs one by one. It proves he has assets. It buys him time. He wants to use your life's work as a human shield to save his own skin. If I call the cops right now and have them formally trespassed from the property, what happens? I asked, looking at the door. They leave, Diana said simply, turning to face me. They drive back to San Antonio. Matthew defaults on his loans, and the lenders tear him apart. But your father will spend the next 5 years trashing your name to everyone you've ever known. He will try to poison your vendors and your reputation. And worst of all, they get away with what they did to you when you were 19. The $32,000 fraud. It just disappears into the past without consequence. I pressed my palms flat against the wooden desk. The anger that had been simmering in my blood for 4 lonely years suddenly crystallized into something entirely cold, sharp, and brutally focused. I don't want them to just leave, I said, looking Diana directly in the eye. I want to end this, permanently. I want to build a legal wall so high they can never, ever climb over it again. Diana studied my face for a long moment. A slow, predatory smile touched the corners of her mouth. Good, because I have a very specific idea. Does Matthew own any real property? Anything actually titled in his name? A house, I said quickly. In Pflugerville. My parents gave him the $80,000 down payment for it 5 years ago. As far as I know, it's the only real, tangible asset he possesses. Diana opened a new legal drafting program. Give me 20 minutes. You need to go back out there into that dining room and put on the performance of a lifetime. You need to look broken, Joshua. You need to look exactly like the weak, submissive, obedient little boy they expect you to be. Diana's fingers attacked the laptop keyboard with terrifying, rhythmic speed. I am drafting a completely new document, she explained without looking up from the glowing screen. It is going to be exactly 11 pages long. It will look dense, boring, and standard. The cover page will look remarkably similar to the equity transfer your father brought. But the internal structure is completely different. I leaned in, watching the dense blocks of legal text populate the screen. What does it actually do? It is a secured commercial loan agreement, she said, her voice dripping with absolute legal precision. You are not giving him a single drop of equity in this restaurant. You are offering Matthew a $200,000 business loan from your LLC to his personal entity, explicitly stated for the purpose of satisfying his aggressive creditors. But here is the catch. The loan is personally guaranteed by Matthew and backed by a primary, enforceable lien on his house in Pflugerville. He will never sign that, I argued, shaking my head. My father reads contracts. He's arrogant, but he's not blind. He'll see the lien clause. He won't read this one, Diana countered smoothly, highlighting a paragraph and changing the font size. Not if you sell the narrative. People see what they desperately want to see. Your father wants to see a terrified, beaten-down son giving up. He wants the ultimate victory. If you hand him a thick stack of legalese and tell him it's just investor compliance paperwork to protect yourself from the IRS, his massive ego will do the rest. He will rush the signing to lock you in. She hit the print command. The heavy laser printer in the corner of my office hummed to life, spitting out crisp, warm pages of absolute financial destruction. "There is one more thing," Diana said, pulling the pages from the tray and tapping them into a neat stack. She handed the heavy folder to me. "This contract gives you immense leverage over his house. But I want leverage over your father. I want the original $32,000 fraud explicitly on the record. Texas is a one-party consent state for recording conversations. I need you to get him to admit what he did to you 9 years ago. Out loud. Clearly." I took the folder. Felt incredibly heavy in my hands. Like a loaded weapon. If he figures out I'm recording him, he'll walk out immediately. "Then do not let him figure it out," Diana said, standing up and crossing her arms. "Use his arrogance against him. Make him think admitting it is his idea. Make him think it helps him." I nodded slowly. I stepped out of the office and walked over to the small mirror hanging by the staff lockers. I stared at my reflection. I unbuttoned the top button of my crisp chef's coat. I let my shoulders slump forward, erasing my confident posture. I practiced the look I needed. Defeated, exhausted. A man who had fought a long, brutal battle and finally realized he couldn't win against the crushing weight of his own blood. I walked out onto the kitchen floor. The dinner rush was in full, glorious swing. Pans sizzled violently, plates clattered against the pass, and the ticket machine chirped relentlessly. "Chloe," I called out to my sous chef. She looked up immediately from a pan of wild mushroom risotto. "I need you to take the line for the next 30 minutes. I am handling a critical situation in the dining room." "Got it, chef. I've got the wheel," she said instantly, stepping right into my station without a single moment of hesitation. That was my real family. The people who actually had my back when the fires got too hot. I found Liam, my head bartender, wiping down the mahogany counter. "Liam, I need a fresh bottle of the Reserve Pinot Noir and a large artisan cheese board sent to table 7. Immediately. On the house. Treat them like absolute VIPs." Liam raised a heavily tattooed eyebrow but nodded sharply. "Right away, boss." I took a deep breath, clutching the legal folder tight to my side. I pushed through the swinging doors and walked out into the dining room. The ambient noise of the restaurant washed over me. The clinking of heavy silverware, the low, steady hum of conversation, the jazz music playing softly from the overhead speakers. It was normal life. As I approached table 7, I saw my father aggressively check his heavy gold watch. Matthew was frantically texting someone, his leg bouncing nervously up and down under the table, betraying his panic. My mother was fixing her lipstick in a small silver compact mirror. Liam arrived exactly when I did, smoothly uncorking the expensive Pinot Noir and pouring it generously into their glasses. He set the beautiful cheese board in the center of the table and vanished. "Thank you, Liam," I said softly, taking the empty 4th chair and sitting down heavily next to my mother. I looked at my father across the table. I let all the false bravado drain completely from my face. I looked down at the tablecloth, running my finger nervously along the rim of an empty water glass. "You win," I said quietly, making sure my voice cracked just a little bit at the edges. "I can't fight you guys anymore. I don't want the drama. I don't want you calling Marcus Chun or harassing my investors. I just want this to be over. I'm tired." My mother's face instantly softened into a mask of fake, sickening warmth. She reached out and placed her cold hand over mine. "Oh, Joshua, we knew you would finally come to your senses. You were always the strong one in this family. We just need you to be strong for your brother one more time. We knew we could count on you." I looked up at Matthew. The wave of absolute relief washing over his face was pathetic. He looked like a drowning man who had just been thrown a life raft. He reached for his wine glass with a slightly trembling hand and took a massive gulp. "I'll do it," I said, sliding Diana's thick, 11-page folder onto the center of the table. "I'll give Matthew the financial backing he needs to survive this. But we have to do this exactly my way. For the accountants." My father frowned slightly, his eyes dropping to the thick stack of paper. "What is all this?" I brought a simple one-page equity transfer document. We don't need a novel. You brought a piece of paper that would trigger a massive, immediate IRS audit for my restaurant, I said, my voice laced with fake anxiety and frustration. If I just hand over 15% equity for absolutely nothing in return, my accountants will flag it as a massive familial gift, and I'll get hit with a 40% capital gains tax. I cannot afford to write a check to the government for that right now. I tapped the heavy folder. My lawyers structured this as a formal, secured business transaction. It looks identical on paper for Matthew's creditors. It shows he has the institutional financial backing of my LLC, but it protects my business from the IRS. It's standard compliance paperwork. Lots of boilerplate language. It just satisfies the legal requirements. My father narrowed his eyes, searching my face, trying to find the trap. But his massive ego was his biggest blind spot. He saw a frightened, exhausted son desperately trying to protect himself from the tax man. He did not see a predator circling him in the water. Fine, David grumbled, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a heavy silver fountain pen. Where do we sign? Let's get this over with. Hold on, I said, putting my hand flat on top of the folder to stop him. I pulled my iPhone out of my pocket and set it face up on the table, propping it slightly against the small flickering candle in the center. I opened the voice memo app. Texas law requires documentation for any business transaction over $10,000 where a verbal agreement is made prior to signing. I lied smoothly, using the exact, confident legal jargon Diana had drilled into my head 10 minutes ago. My accountant insists I record verbal confirmation of the terms, just to prove to the IRS that this isn't a family tax evasion scheme. It's just a formality for the corporate files. Matthew shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes darting to the phone. A recording? Is that really necessary? I don't like being recorded. If you want the money tonight, it is, I said, looking straight into his panicked eyes. It takes 2 minutes. Do you want the investors off your back? Or do you want to walk out of here with nothing? Matthew swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing, and nodded frantically at our father. I pressed the red record button on the screen. The digital timer started ticking. 001. 002. I need to state clearly for the record, I began, my voice entirely clear and measured, projecting perfectly into the microphone, that my company, Wren's LLC, is entering into a financial backing agreement with Matthew to satisfy his personal debt obligations. Matthew, you confirm you have no liquid assets to cover this obligation yourself. I confirm, Matthew muttered softly, staring at the tablecloth. Great. I turned my gaze directly to my father. My heart was pounding like a jackhammer against my ribs, but my hands, resting on the table, were completely steady. Now, for my accountant to clear this without flagging it as a pattern of undocumented family gifts, we need to address the prior financial history. We need to clearly, legally separate this new transaction from the past. My father's jaw tightened. What past? What are you talking about? The $32,000, I said gently, offering him a look of pure, manufactured sympathy. The personal loan taken out in my name 9 years ago. My accountant found it on my old credit history when we applied for the commercial lease. She needs you to state on the audio record that it was an informal family matter handled in the past, so she can legally separate it from today's corporate transaction. It actually protects you, Dad. It officially closes the book on it, so the IRS can't look backward. I held my breath. The entire restaurant seemed to fade away into white noise. It was just the 4 of us, the ticking red timer on my phone screen, and 9 years of buried, agonizing trauma waiting to be unearthed. My father looked at the phone. He looked at the thick contract that promised immediate salvation for his favorite son. I could practically see the gears grinding in his head. He was doing the math, admitting to an old, buried mistake to secure a massive financial victory tonight. He leaned slightly toward the phone, adopting his most authoritative, reasonable patriarch voice. For the record, David stated, clearly articulating every single syllable, There was a loan taken out in Joshua's name approximately 9 years ago for the amount of $32,000. It was used for family purposes to assist Matthew. I initiated that transaction informally at the time. It was a mistake, but it is entirely separate from today's business. That matter is closed. Got you. A freezing cold thrill of pure, unadulterated victory shot straight down my spine. I kept my face entirely blank. Perfect. Thank you. That is exactly what my accountant needs to hear. I didn't stop the recording. I let it run. I slid the heavy contract across the table toward Matthew. Sign the flagged lines on page 11. Mom, Dad, you need to sign as legal guarantors on the bottom lines. Matthew didn't even read the title page. He was too desperate, too terrified of the men hunting him. He grabbed the silver pen and scribbled his signature so fast the paper almost tore. He handed the pen to my mother, who signed with a dramatic, put-upon sigh, and finally handed it to my father. David slashed his arrogant signature across the bottom line without reading a single word of the 11 dense pages of legalese. My father handed the closed folder back to me. There, my father said, leaning back heavily in his chair and taking a triumphant, greedy sip of his wine. We're done here. You did the right thing, Joshua. We're proud of you for stepping up. I took the folder. I picked up my iPhone. I hit stop on the recording and immediately backed the audio file up to a secure cloud server. Then I looked up. The tired, defeated, submissive sun vanished completely. I straightened my spine, letting my true posture, the posture of an executive chef who ran $1 million business, return. Yes, I said softly, my voice cutting through the ambient noise of the restaurant like a surgical blade. We are absolutely done. Part 6. The storm subsides. My father frowned, his brow furrowing as he sensed the sudden, violent shift in the atmosphere at the table. What is that look? Why are you looking at me like that? I placed both my hands flat on the table and leaned in incredibly close. I didn't sign over 15% of my restaurant to you, I said, my voice dangerously calm and steady. In fact, I didn't sign over a single percent. What you just signed, Matthew, without bothering to read a single page, is a legally binding, secured commercial loan note. Matthew froze entirely, his wine glass hovering halfway to his mouth. What are you talking about? What loan? I'm talking about your $200,000 debt, I continued, deeply enjoying the raw, unadulterated panic slowly dawning in his eyes. You see, while you were sitting here drinking my expensive wine and acting like you owned the place, my lawyer did some deep digging. We found out exactly who you owed money to, and we realized that those hard money lenders were incredibly desperate to offload a bad, unsecured debt from a guy driving a rented Porsche. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator that had finally trapped its prey. So, 30 minutes ago, my lawyer contacted them directly. I bought your debt, Matthew. I paid them 60 cents on the dollar in pure cash. They emailed over the transfer documents while you were eating the complimentary cheese board. My mother gasped loudly, dropping her linen napkin onto the floor. Joshua, what does that mean? It means, I said, locking eyes directly with my brother, that those dangerous men don't own your debt anymore. I do. I am your sole creditor. You owe me $200,000. And that document you just happily signed? That was a primary asset guarantee. It secures the debt legally against the only thing you actually own in this world, your house in Pflugerville. The color completely drained from Matthew's face, leaving him looking like a corpse. He looked like he was going to vomit right onto the table. You put a lien on my house? A primary, fully enforceable lien, I confirmed, tapping the folder. If you miss a single monthly payment, my LLC will aggressively foreclose on your home, evict you, sell the property, and keep the equity. And there is absolutely nothing you or your lawyer can do about it. You little son of a bitch, my father roared, slamming his heavy fist down on the table, rattling the silverware. A few guests nearby turned their heads, alarmed. This is extortion. This is illegal. I'll call Marcus Chun right now. I'll ruin you and this pathetic restaurant. Go ahead, I challenged, my voice turning to absolute ice. Call Marcus. You should know Marcus eats lunch in this exact booth every third Thursday of the month. He loves my food. We play golf with my lawyer. He thinks you are a joke. Call him. Let me know exactly how it goes. David's hand hovered over his suit pocket, hesitating. The crushing realization that he had absolutely no power here, no leverage left, was finally breaking through his thick, arrogant skull. And as for ruining me, I added, tapping the glass screen of my iPhone, you just confessed, on a crystal-clear audio recording, to committing identity theft and wire fraud against a minor 9 years ago. In the state of Texas, the statute of limitations for that specific financial fraud is 10 years. We have 1 year left before it expires. My father stopped breathing. The blood rushed out of his face, leaving him looking old, hollow, and utterly defeated. If you ever threaten me again, I whispered, leaning over the table so close he could smell the mint on my breath. If you ever show up at my business again, if you ever text me, if you ever even look in my general direction, I will take this audio recording directly to the district attorney, and I will sit in the front row and watch them put you in a federal prison. Do you understand me? Silence. Absolute, crushing silence enveloped table 7. My mother started to cry, real, ugly tears this time, her makeup running. Joshua, please, don't do this. We are your family. No, Sarah, I said, standing up to my full height and looking down at her. I didn't even call her mom. You are just the people who gave me the DNA I had to spend years overcoming. My real family is in that kitchen. Now, get the hell out of my restaurant. I reached under the edge of the heavy wooden table and pressed the small, silent security button I had installed a year ago. I just pressed the panic button, I stated flatly, looking at my watch. The Austin Police Department will be walking through those front doors in exactly 4 minutes. If you are still sitting in these chairs when they arrive, I will have you formally trespassed, and I will hand the officers the audio file right now. Matthew didn't wait. He practically scrambled out of the booth, knocking over his water glass in his haste. He grabbed his fake Porsche keys and bolted for the front door without looking back once. My father stood up slowly, his hands shaking violently, his massive ego shattered into a million irreparable pieces on the floor. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred, but he didn't say a single word. He grabbed my mother tightly by the arm and dragged her out. I stood there and watched them walk out into the humid Austin night. I watched the taillights of Matthew's leased car disappear rapidly down the dark street. A heavy, incredibly beautiful silence settled over my shoulders. For years of crushing anxiety, of constantly looking over my shoulder, of feeling the phantom weight of a $32,000 chain around my neck, it all evaporated into thin air. I was finally truly free. This is a moment that changed everything, when I finally regained control of my life. Thank you for your patience in getting this far. You are amazing. Please like the video and leave a comment below to let me know you've been with me. This will not only help more people find this story, but also let me know that my experiences are meaningful to someone. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of this journey. I stood completely still by the front window, watching the red taillights of Matthew's leased car disappear down the dark Austin street. The heavy Texas humidity seemed to swallow the vehicle whole, erasing it from my world just as easily as they had tried to erase me 4 years ago. The flashing blue and red lights of an Austin Police Department cruiser reflected against the glass a moment later. 2 officers walked through the front doors, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. Priya intercepted them immediately, her voice calm and professional. I walked over, my heart rate finally beginning to slow down to a normal rhythm. I shook the lead officer's hand and explained that the disruptive individuals had just vacated the premises and no further action was required tonight. They took my statement, did a quick sweep of the dining room, and left within 10 minutes. The moment the heavy glass door clicked shut behind the officers, the entire atmosphere of the restaurant shifted. The suffocating tension that had gripped my dining room evaporated, replaced by a profound, echoing relief. I turned around to face my floor manager. Priya was standing by the host's stand, her arms crossed, a fiercely protective look in her dark eyes. "Are you okay, Joshua?" she asked quietly. "I am," I said, and for the first time in my entire adult life, the words were completely true. "I really am." I walked back toward the kitchen. The noise of the dinner rush hit me like a warm wave. Sizzling pans, the sharp chopping of knives against heavy wooden boards, the smell of garlic and white wine reducing in a hot skillet. Chloe, my sous chef, looked up from the pass. She didn't ask questions. She just handed me a clean apron and bumped her shoulder against mine. That was all the communication we needed. We finished the dinner service together, pushing out flawless plates until the final ticket was cleared. When the last guest left and the staff began the closing teardown, I walked back into my small office. Diana was still sitting at my desk. The glowing screen of her laptop illuminated the sharp, calculating lines of her face. She had the signed, 11-page commercial loan agreement resting neatly on top of her leather briefcase. "It is done," I told her, leaning against the doorframe. I felt physically exhausted, as if I had just sprinted 10 miles, but my mind was remarkably clear. Diana looked up, her expression evaluating me with the keen eye of a veteran trial lawyer. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about the question. I thought about the crushing weight of the $32,000 fraud that had stolen my youth. I thought about the miserable studio apartment, the endless double shifts, the utter lack of a college fund or a safety net. And then I thought about the look of absolute terror on my father's face when he realized his empire of manipulation had crumbled. "I feel like I finally paid off a debt," I said honestly. "And I feel like I am never, ever going back to that place again." Diana nodded once. It was the exact nod she gave when a judge ruled in her favor. It meant the facts were established, the victory was secured, and no further elaboration was necessary. "I will file the lien against Matthew's property in Pflugerville first thing tomorrow morning," she said, tapping the signed contract. "The county clerk will record it by the end of the week. This is an ironclad asset guarantee. If he tries to sell the house, refinance, or take out another line of credit, it will flag immediately. You hold the primary position. He cannot make a single financial move without your explicit, written consent." The next 6 weeks were a masterclass in watching a toxic system completely dismantle itself from the inside out. Diana filed the paperwork flawlessly. The court processed the commercial lien without a single incident. According to the deep background check she ran a week later, Matthew's financial world imploded exactly as we predicted. Without the 15% equity stake in my restaurant to act as a shield, his creditors descended on him. He lost the leased Porsche. He lost his fake corporate title. He was forced to liquidate the meager contents of his bank accounts just to keep the aggressive hard money lenders from taking him to court. By the second week of January, Matthew had officially hit rock bottom. And sitting right there at the bottom waiting for him was the $200,000 secured note he owed his little brother. He didn't have the cash to pay it off, and because of the lien Diana filed, he couldn't run away. He was trapped in a financial cage of his own making. He never called me to argue. He didn't have the courage. Instead, his cheap bankruptcy lawyer contacted Diana to arrange a payment schedule. Matthew set up an automatic monthly transfer to my LLC. The payments were small, manageable, but legally binding. They were the kind of payments that would stretch across the next 20 years of his life. Every single month, on the first of the month, a fraction of his paycheck would land in my business account. It was a constant, unavoidable reminder that he was finally taking responsibility for his own failures. My father held out for exactly 3 weeks before his ego forced him to reach out. I was in the kitchen prepping for the Friday dinner rush when my cell phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, likely a burner phone or a borrowed office line. I let it go straight to voicemail. 10 minutes later, I stepped into the walk-in cooler, surrounded by crates of fresh produce, and played the message. It was David. He talked for 4 uninterrupted minutes. He didn't apologize for the extortion attempt. He didn't apologize for stealing my identity when I was 19. Instead, he spun a wildly delusional narrative about fairness, family loyalty, and the legacy he was trying to protect. He talked about how I was tearing the family apart, how I was being vindictive and cruel to the people who raised me. He used every manipulative buzzword in his arsenal, trying to make me feel guilty for simply enforcing the legal contract he had willingly signed. I listened to the entire voicemail twice. I analyzed his tone, noting the desperate, ragged edge beneath his arrogant delivery. He wasn't speaking from a position of power anymore. He was a cornered man shouting into the void. I didn't call him back. I deleted the voicemail, blocked the new number, and walked back out into my kitchen. The restaurant, shielded from my family's chaos, continued to thrive. We had our most profitable quarter on record that March. The local food critics praised our innovative spring menu, and we had a waiting list for weekend reservations that stretched 3 weeks out. I hired 2 additional line cooks, gave Chloe a substantial raise and the official title of executive chef, and extended our operating hours. The reclaimed wood on the dining room walls had aged to the exact warm, amber shade I had imagined years ago when I first sketched the layout of this place on a stained cocktail napkin. Back then, I was a 23-year-old kid working a brutal double shift at a diner, certain of absolutely nothing except the vague shape of the future I was desperately trying to build. Now, that future was standing right in front of me, solid and undeniable. Late one Thursday afternoon, Marcus Chun walked into the restaurant for his regular lunch. Marcus was a quiet, observant man in his late 60s who owned half the commercial real estate on this block. He always ordered the seared salmon and a glass of iced tea. I walked out to his booth and sat down across from him. We talked about the local real estate market, the rising cost of ingredients, and the minor plumbing issue we fixed last month. As he was finishing his tea, Marcus looked at me directly. I received a very strange phone call a few weeks ago, Joshua, from a man named David Calloway. He claimed to be your father. He told me a very elaborate story about how you were engaged in fraudulent business practices and suggested I terminate your commercial lease immediately to protect my property. My stomach tightened briefly, but I held his gaze. And what did you tell him, Marcus? Marcus smiled, a genuine, warm expression. I told him that you are the most reliable, hard-working tenant I have had in 30 years of commercial real estate. I told him that your rent is always early, your restaurant is spotless, and that if he ever called my private number to slander you again, my attorneys would file a harassment suit against him before he could hang up the phone. I let out a breath, a profound sense of gratitude washing over me. Thank you, Marcus. I appreciate that more than you know. You don't owe that man anything, Joshua, Marcus said softly, sliding out of the booth. You built this. Protect it. The final piece of the fallout came a few days later. My mother texted me from a new number. It wasn't a long paragraph of manipulation. It was just 4 simple words. I hope you're happy. It was a loaded statement, designed to inject a final drop of venom, a final seed of doubt into my mind. It was meant to imply that my success was built on their suffering, that my boundaries were actually acts of cruelty. I looked at the text message for a long time. I thought about the young boy who desperately just wanted his mother to defend him, to protect him from his father's schemes and his brother's failures. That boy was gone. He had grown up on the wet concrete curb outside a leasing office. I typed back 2 words. I meant both of them with every fiber of my being. I am. Then I blocked the number permanently, dropped the phone into my pocket, and went back to work. It is 2 in the morning on a Sunday. The restaurant is completely empty. The waitstaff went home hours ago. The kitchen is scrubbed spotlessly clean, and the heavy front doors are deadbolt. I am sitting alone at table 7, the exact table where my family tried to execute their final, desperate shakedown. The streetlights outside cast long, quiet shadows across the dining room floor. I have a glass of the reserve Pinot Noir in my hand. The same wine Liam poured for my father right before he signed his own financial death warrant. I take a slow sip, letting the rich, dark flavor settle on my tongue. The silence in the room isn't lonely. It is the most beautiful, hard-earned silence I have ever experienced. I look around at the gleaming mahogany bar, the brass fixtures, the meticulously set tables waiting for tomorrow's service. I think about the concept of legacy. My father was obsessed with legacy. He believed that bloodline dictated loyalty, that simply sharing a last name gave him the inherent right to consume the lives of the people around him. He sacrificed my financial future, my youth, and my trust, all to preserve the hollow, decaying image of his golden child. But sitting here tonight, I know exactly what my legacy is. My legacy isn't an inheritance passed down through a wealthy family. It isn't a trust fund or a college account that was never there. My legacy is the calluses on my hands. It is the 2 grueling years I spent paying off a $32,000 fraud just so I could have a clean slate. My legacy is Chloe, who stepped up to run my kitchen without a second of hesitation. It is Priya, who stood fiercely by the door to protect my peace. It is Diana, who taught me how to turn the law into an impenetrable fortress. I think about Wyatt, the old friend who sold me out for a fleeting moment of petty jealousy. That betrayal stung, but it taught me a vital lesson. Trust is not a default setting. It is a currency that must be earned, respected, and protected. Wyatt chose to align himself with the ghosts of my past, and in doing so, he became one of them. My real family doesn't share my DNA. My real family is the network of incredibly strong, loyal, and capable people I have intentionally chosen to surround myself with. We built this sanctuary together, and no one, absolutely no one, gets to walk in uninvited and demand a piece of it. I survived the ambush. I didn't just survive it. I dismantled their entire toxic power structure. The audio recording of my father's confession sits securely in 3 different encrypted cloud servers. It is the ultimate insurance policy. As long as I hold it, he can never touch me. And Matthew, the arrogant golden boy, will spend the next 2 decades quite literally paying for his mistakes, funding the very LLC he tried to steal from. It is a ruthless outcome, but it is a profoundly fair one. Before I close out this video, I want to leave you with this thought. We are often conditioned by society to believe that family is an unbreakable bond, that we must endlessly forgive and accommodate the people who share our blood, no matter how deeply they cut us. But that is a lie designed to keep victims trapped in the cycle of abuse. You have the absolute, undeniable right to walk away from toxic people, even if those people are your parents or your siblings. Setting firm, immovable boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of radical self-preservation. You do not owe your life, your hard-earned success, or your mental health to people who only view you as an asset to be exploited. If someone demands that you set yourself on fire just to keep them warm, hand them a match and walk out the door. Your peace is worth infinitely more than their approval. You have the power to write your own story, to choose your own family, and to build a life that belongs entirely to you. Thank you so much for sitting with me and listening to my story today. I know it was a heavy one, but sharing it feels like lifting a massive weight off my chest. I want to hear from you now. What is the biggest lesson you are taking away from this story? Have you ever had to set a painful boundary with a toxic family member? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, or simply drop the word good, so I know you made it to the end and that these lessons resonated with you. Your support means the world to me. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.